Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin Tizik, and this episode is all about LinkedIn ads. So Simon, who is the Director of Digital Marketing over at Lacework, he joins me today to talk about how shifting from, a straight up old school lead gen model to more of a demand gen approach on LinkedIn really helped to drive revenue for Lacework, how LinkedIn best works with Google and programmatic and all your other ad channels, and also what particular ad types and styles have been working for him and what he's excited to try in the future. On to the episode. Hey, Simon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yes. Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. We're going to talk about LinkedIn ads, which I've made many mistakes on in the past, and I feel like I've finally kind of sort of figured it out and got it working. And I think you've, experienced some of the same things as well. So I think that's maybe a good place to start is, what do you think are the most common mistakes that people make with LinkedIn ads on how they structure and how they run them?
Yeah, so I think I think it's a constant learning curve, right? It's a platform constantly changing, the algorithm changes, the ad formats change. But I think the biggest thing is really about what do you want to get out of the platform, right? I think for a lot of B2B marketers specifically, it's definitely about leads, but I think it's also about quality of the content and audience reach, right? LinkedIn is the best platform, in my opinion, to go out and target exactly the right accounts, the right titles that you're looking for. That's the beauty of the platform. And I think the other beauty of the platform is that there's a lot of different ad formats out there, right? You have video, you have carousel ads, you have thought leader ads, you have text ads, spotlight ads, right? Really, really good variety, which I think for an audience in today's world likes different things. And so, I always compare it against Google paid search, right? It's just like one format and it's text ads.
Yeah.
And, while it's very powerful, billions of searches done all the time. I think from a creativity standpoint, there's a lot more levers to pull on LinkedIn. So kind of to go back to your original question is, what's your goal? Right? It all stems from that. And for us, it really is about generating pipeline and revenue. The best way that we look at it is, how do you get people to raise their hands to take a meeting with you, right? That's like the gold standard in terms of what converts at the highest rate to actual pipeline and revenue. And so for us, we've learned, and this is a expensive and painful lesson over, the course of my career, but also just at Lacework, is it's really hard to get someone to take a meeting with you if they've never heard of you, don't know what you do, and they haven't been exposed to your brand, right? So I think taking that full funnel approach is, hey, how do you position your company as a thought leader in the space? And how do you do it in a way that you're not asking for anything back right away, right? I think that's where a lot of B2B marketing that's the approach that's been taken in the past. That doesn't really work today and doesn't really resonate well with, I think, people in general. I don't even want to say we target like a cybersecurity audience, developer audience, right? They're quote unquote more fickle, but at the end of the day, they're people, right? And they want to be treated in the way that normal people want to be treated, in the sense that I don't want to give you my information until I'm ready, right? Teach me something I don't already know. Give me a new perspective on something I don't really know, and kind of bring me along this journey with you. And so that's how I kind of see it. And that's how I treat LinkedIn, and how we build our content and how we build our strategy to get towards the goals that we're trying to get to. So.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because we've all kind of been burned with the giving up our data part before, I think, in the past, where, this ebook, I'm using that in air quotes because it's not a book. It's like 6 pages that don't actually provide anything. And then
sometimes
you get
2 pages, sometimes 1.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That becomes an infographic, but then you get some salesperson trying to sell you. And if anything, that negatively impacts the brand. So I want to talk about, we'll get into kind of the details of different ad types, formats at different stages, and kind of how you think through that. But I guess first, before we talk about that, because I know everyone's thinking this, I agree on the brand building, awareness, getting them to know who you are part. CMOs and C-suite are going to challenge that on how do we measure that and know it's working. So let's get that one out of the way first, maybe, and how you handle that.
That's hard. That's probably the hardest question. And the way that I'm kind of measured is really from what do we spend total dollar wise on LinkedIn, and what's the output of that? I don't look at it in a super granular view of, okay, how did this one ad perform?
Yeah.
Right. Because when you start doing that, it gets really messy. And, attribution, that's the name of the game. It's what can you attribute to your efforts? And that's really hard sometimes in advertising because uh, you put things out there and they're seen, but they're not engaged with. And we're measured purely on engagement and
Mhm.
really about form fills, right? And that's like, we're not even talking about did they even click on it, but did they fill out a form for it? And there's just some things that don't require a form that don't need to be measured in that way. They're really meant, and the way that I think about it is really about, we do look at engagement in terms of clicks and like view throughs, because what we do is we have a very kind of heavy retargeting focus, right?
Yeah.
We want to expose you to the brand, content, whatever it is. We want to retarget you with hopefully better content or more engaging content, and taking that engagement signal as our retargeting parameter. So that's how I look at it, but I don't look at it as like, okay, how did this one video do? Like how many meetings did this book? That's not how I look at it. It's just in totality, all the spend on LinkedIn, what was the output of that from like, how did that impact the business in terms of pipeline and revenue?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, especially on the remarketing side, because that's
Yeah.
where most of it is going to come from. Even not just people who engage on LinkedIn, but you mentioned Google Ads, right? You
Right.
could get a 3-person company that comes in and fills out a form and wastes your click. Or you could get, a giant company that clicks, never converts, but then you can filter and target on LinkedIn and kind of drill down
Yeah.
on the audience.
Yeah. Or, that big company, I mean, we know that, and, as a company, our motion is going up market.
Mhm.
Those sales cycles are way longer, and we're
Yeah.
measured on a, quarterly basis for the most part. Like we look at weekly, monthly data and all that, but everything's measured in quarter. And so
Mhm.
what happens when your sales cycle is 12 months on an enterprise company or more, right? Like sometimes
Yeah.
it's even bigger, but that deal's worth, you know, $1 million, let's just say that, or more, right? So I think the expectation is different based off of segment, but I also think that that's when you look at LinkedIn and you looked at Google, like I said before, it is very different, right? Like you don't know who's coming to your website and who's clicking there. But I think
Yeah.
the flip side of that is how do you get more people to search for your brand? Because
Yeah.
that's not a given thing. It's not unlimited. You have to drive that demand. You have to get people to want to search for you from a branded search term perspective. Because we even see at Lacework, like there are times where we're like, hey, search terms are down this month for our terms. Why is that? Well, maybe
Mhm.
we weren't writing enough content or getting enough engagement. We're getting in front of the right people. So that's, all these different platforms, to me, they kind of feed into each other. So I think it's important to think about the relationships between like what you do here can affect somewhere here. Right.
Yeah, the branded search one's interesting. Like we look at that too, both for branded paid and just organic. Are they
Organic.
searching
Right.
for us going to the homepage to see? And it's one of those things you could think, LinkedIn's not working or Meta, or pick your channel.
Yeah.
Then you turn it off and you realize all those search terms plummet and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
interrelated, right?
All the organic and direct stuff goes away because it's like I said, I think what it comes down to is advertising at the end of the day. You have to look at it from a reach and engagement perspective and not
Mhm.
necessarily like how do they convert for you? And that's how we've always been measured in B2B, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
But it does lift all tides, especially when you turn things off and they were driving, traffic to your website organically, directly, or even other places, right? Review sites, et cetera. Like what makes people want to look for you? That's
Yeah.
that's always a kind of a difficult question too, because it's not just paid, right? It's other things, it's other motions in marketing. But yeah,
Yeah, it's a bit of art and science, right? Like you have to have the
yeah,
faith of I'm getting the right message in front of the right people. And I feel like, so we talked about remarketing. I think people are maybe more well versed in there because I feel like people have been using LinkedIn for remarketing for a long time. I think where people struggle and where I struggled before is more on the cold layer of how do I build that awareness? Because traditionally LinkedIn is let's promote
yeah.
ourselves. That doesn't play so well. So I'm curious how you're structuring and thinking about the cold layer and maybe some of the tactics you're using there.
Yeah. So for me, and I think I'll kind of add context to this is in that
Yeah.
we're still trying to figure it out too, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, us too.
I think a big thing is something works till it doesn't, right? Like 20% of the results you get from let me flip that backwards. It's the 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah.
Or like, not everything, most things you'd put out there are not going to work, but you got to find the nuggets that do. But I think it comes back to content at the end of the day. Your cold layer is really about putting you and your company and your product and your people as thought leaders in the space. And that doesn't necessarily mean how do you solve problems? Like what's your approach? But it's what is the problem? I hear your pain.
Mhm.
Like tell that story, right? Tell me what I don't know. Tell me how to do my job better. And then where retargeting comes in is just, okay, here's our approach and why we think our approach is better for you, right? And that's where I think a lot of companies get it wrong because it's immediately like, we're going to solve this for you today and we're the best, right? And that's a tough thing to sell because you're coming in pretty hot to that audience and you're not necessarily presenting all the pain points through your content and through your messaging to that audience. And so and what we've seen is you kind of got to hear that story more than once too, like a couple of times. And so your content really becomes, how do you place yourself as a thought leader? How do you tell me about the pains? How do you tell me about how to do my job better? And then introduce your solution, right? That's how that's the approach we've taken. And we haven't gotten it perfect, but I think if you have that perspective and that framework, I think it works a lot better than, here's a demo of why we're great, right? Like fill out before.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're taking a similar approach. Like we sell testimonial videos. We aren't going to say we're the best, come buy from us in the cold layer. We instead, focus on the problem, which is there's less trust out there between people buying software. Social proof of videos help solve that. Here's why you need our category, not us.
Yeah.
But then it positions us, I think, as more of like a thought leader and evangelist of the category. And those are the ones where when someone's thinking about the category, they search and hopefully go direct to us. So that's kind of our thought process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the right thought process. And I think figuring out the tactics to go kind of execute that, that's, you got to figure out what sticks for you and your audience. But I think that's the framework that works the best because we know what doesn't work, right? It's what we just talked about before. So I think this is the best approach, at least today, until we figure something out that's better.
Yeah, it's changing all the time. And I think on that note of things changing and tactics, curious, like, I guess also from an ad type point of view, probably more than anything else, and the content side as well. But what's working now? Like, what do you find has changed that's really resonating and what maybe isn't working that used to be, your go-to?
Yeah, I think what's working right now, and it like I said, excuse me, it depends on what your goals are, right? At the end of the day, like you have to figure that out. But for us, we look at if we want to put ourselves as thought leaders, what's the best way to do that? And I kind of look at myself and I look at how other companies do marketing towards me, right? Because I'm a buyer for, advertising or marketing technology. And so I always look at what other people are doing and what resonates kind of with an approach that I like. And the approach that I like is really learning from other people, right? People first, messaging, content. And it just feels like I don't really learn from brands. I learn from people. And people are thought leaders. Brands aren't necessarily thought leaders. It's the people that represent the brands. Now, that goes back to LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn recently launched thought leadership ads. Those have been working tremendously well for us. We get a ton of great reach on the organic feeling posts, and they are organic. I mean, when I promote something from a thought leadership ad, it is not crafted. It's not ghostwritten. It's not like framed in a way that we're like, hey, push this message. We actually let our thought leaders go out and promote whatever they're going to promote first. We just kind of pick what we think fits best and we go push that to the right accounts and the right titles. And so we've seen kind of tremendous, we'll call them vanity metrics, but tremendous click-through rates, the click volume's great. And for me, it's all about how do we drive the right people that want to hear this stuff into a remarketing audience so that we can give them a little bit more depth on that type of content or that topic, right? And then that's when we can kind of expose them to the brand a little bit more. But that is an ad format that I think has worked really well. You see more and more people every day use it. So I think there's the shininess begins to wear off a little bit. Performance will begin to drop off a little bit. I think first to market execution is always critical when it comes to new ad formats to just be a little bit different. But also, I think video, right? Like video is one of those things that I always know, and it's really about like really short form, like high impact content, which is probably the hardest type of content to make.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's like those two formats are really good. And I think video is the most impactful because there's so much more to say than a static image, right? And it usually is when it comes from a person that has no real angle, right? Like for us, we don't use marketing or sales folks in our content. It's really about like people that are thought leaders in that space already, that already have a reputation that's strong. And whatever they talk about, it's really not selling anything. It's just bringing attention to topics that we want to kind of surround ourselves with. So, and video is an interesting one because typically everyone thinks video is really expensive, right? You got to have a production crew, script, and all that. But I think the best type of content is the type of content that you kind of start to see a lot more of is just talking heads, not perfectly lit, and all that. And it just feels a little bit more genuine, especially if the topic is good. I mean, no amount of, post-production or anything like that going to cover bad content. So I think those two formats are the most impactful in today's world.
Yeah, we've seen both those working well. Actually, the thing I like about video as well is it's easier to funnel people to remarketing.
Oh, 100%.
In my opinion, because you can trigger it off of, 25% viewed versus how many click.
Yeah.
Because I would like to get more clicks on LinkedIn. People just don't click on stuff or engage that much, right?
You know what an interesting thing is that you can build, and this gets a little crazy, but you can build remarketing audiences based off of warmness or intent based off of how much of a video they watch, right? If you have a 5-minute demo video and the drop off rates are crazy, right? Like, 25, 50, 75 and full, almost no one looks at full. But if someone does, and you have an audience built that consumed that 5-minute video, hey, that might be a much warmer lead than the person that's at 25%, right? And like I said, it depends on the topic and what the purpose of that like piece of content or that video content was. But that's a really interesting thing to think about when you're remarketing, because you can't just box everyone together. I mean, you can, we all do it to a degree. But I think when you think about, 30, 60, 90-day retargeting audiences, right? Like there's a different level of intent and engagement to that. You can do the same thing with video, like views.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think intent is key because you have to match, like you said, the length, the positioning, the messaging, like everything has to tie to where that person is. Otherwise, they just brush it aside and say, hey, my feed has too much stuff. I'm not even looking at that right now.
Right. Yeah.
So I do know you have to get out of here in a couple of minutes. I feel like we crammed a lot of great kind of LinkedIn thoughts, ideas in there. But if people want to learn more, connect with you, talk LinkedIn, where should they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, right?
There you go. Very meta.
Very more active on that channel because I think it's the right type of audience where, people are looking to learn a little bit of something about individual topics. I think it's just one of those places where it's really easy to get exposed to good stuff, but also really easy to get kind of overwhelmed by too much stuff. So you can certainly find me on there. Yeah, best way, definitely.
Cool. So I'll include that link and a link to Lacework if anyone wants to check out what you all do over there. So those will be in the show notes for listeners. Simon, thanks for joining me and talking about LinkedIn. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening. My key takeaway here is just thinking about LinkedIn ads more as a distribution channel to get your point of view in front of your desired audience repeatedly. So, use retargeting, down funnel campaigns to help recoup your costs, prove ROI, get immediate returns. But you also need to take a long-term approach and be confident that you have the right content and you're getting it in front of the right people. So old school classic marketing, good content, right audience. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.